Hey, welcome back to the Mining Pod. On today's show, we're joined by Marathon Digital Holdings to discuss both their inscription and Layer 2 software, which they announced over the last few weeks. This turned a lot of heads because, hey, they're jumping right into inscriptions and they're trying to build out Layer 2 solutions for Bitcoin. Thank you to Marathon for joining the podcast. We'd also like to thank our sponsor on the CoinDesk Podcast Network, CleanSpark, America's Bitcoin miner. We'll hear more from CleanSpark later today in the episode. Okay, before we jump into the show, we also want to make a shout out to our Bitcoin halvening party happening on April 20th here in Denver, Colorado. If you are in the Rocky Mountain region, be sure to check out our show notes and come to our event. Gotta celebrate the halvening. Only happens once every 4 years. We'll have more details on the halvening party in the show notes, so click below to check that out. Okay, onto the show. Welcome back to the Mining Pod. We finally got Marathon on to talk about L2s and inscriptions. You guys turned the mining world upside down the other week. So thank you for joining the podcast, Julian and Mike. I'll hand it over to you guys just for some quick bios. First, you, Julian.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Will. Thanks for having us. My name is Julian. I'm head of product for Anduro and a product lead over at Marathon Digital. The Layer 2 is definitely something very exciting for me. I would say my history in blockchain has been across a number of different networks, but yeah, my history in work has spanned presidential campaigns, social impact work in LATAM, energy in China. I've been everywhere and nowhere all at once. So I'll pass it over to you, Mike.
I'm Mike Casey, or Michael B. Casey. I'm director of engineering here at Marathon. Been here for a little over a year, which makes me an old timer here. I've been in Bitcoin class of 2012, so I've been around a while. Been in the space. Did about 5 years at General Motors as chief blockchain architect. And I spent the last year in Marathon mostly building out the Enduro platform.
Love it. Okay, so much to dive into. For the audience, we're going to be talking about two things, mostly inscriptions, and then second of all, the Layer 2. I think we could easily do one show on each of these topics, but we're going to smush them together. Let's start with the inscriptions announcement, since that was first. Essentially, you guys are opening up the Marathon block space that you guys not only produce because you're Bitcoin miners, but also because you have Mara Pool. You're opening that up to inscriptions and Ordinals builders by being a little bit more malleable in terms of transactions. Mike, I'll throw it to you first to kind of describe on an engineering level what this product is about, and then Julian, we'll go to you to talk about who you guys are opening up this block space for.
Right. So the product is branded Slipstream. It's Marathon Slipstream. Slipstream.mara.com is the URL. It's currently not actually up and live for direct integration, but we're taking requests for one-offs currently. But this is actually the brainchild of Portland Hoddle, who we've been working with very closely. And really what it enables us to do is to process these non-standard transactions, which are kind of in high demand right now, between ordinal inscriptions and runes and everything else coming on in that whole side of the business. It allows us to actually arbitrage the demand for these things, because you cannot pass these directly over the network. So if you can pass them directly to us as a miner, and they're more profitable for us to mine, we're going to mine them. So it's basically long and short.
Julian, over to you. Tell us about who do you want working with this, using this product?
Yeah, we basically want main chain transaction innovators, which that can include members of the inscriptions community, members of the Ordinals community, members of any community that really wants to try to take Bitcoin transacting in a new direction. I think the really one big theme that we are trying to underscore with this product is that of anti-censorship, and basically allowing any transaction that, of course, meets Bitcoin Core consensus rules, giving it a channel to be propagated across the network. Now, of course, there are standards, right, to that, but I think by and large, you see a lot of the community in 2023 having innovated to an extent where now you see other communities in Ethereum and Solana even taking upon themselves to try out their own hands at inscription. So we really just wanted to further that sort of experimentation and feed into this broader layer 2 narrative that Marathon has, which is let's find new ways to use Bitcoin. Simple as that.
So tell me a little bit about the standardness rules and consensus rules. I think this is what trips people up most. When they saw this announcement, they're like, what? Bitcoin can't do this. Like, how is it supposed to work? But obviously there's like more sets of rules here.
Right. Well, there of course are the standardness rules, and there's a couple different buckets that those fall in, and we haven't loosened the scary, dangerous ones, the ones that allow people to attack Bitcoin. Instead, really, we're just more focused on, just removing things that are more paternalistic in nature, like the 100 kilobyte limit for an individual transaction size. If you're talking about SegWit transactions, it's not really it's not really a problem with that. There's no quadratic hashing issue or anything that can lead to an attack on Bitcoin that can make it harder to actually validate the blocks, right? So that being said, the things that are largely in demand are, you can do dust-free transactions. You can do, there's the dust limit's no longer in play, rather. So you can actually do transactions all the way down to a single Satoshi or no value at all if you're willing to pay for the space. You can do anything you want with op returns, for example. Another benefit of the platform is transactions are effectively, they're not public. I wouldn't say there's any guarantee of privacy of it, but we do not broadcast them to the wider network. So if you want to snag a BRC20 ticker that you don't want to broadcast the fact that you're doing it by posting it to the public mempool, it represents another way to do it. But that's as a broad topic, that's just basically what Slipstream does. But the bigger thing, I think, it's kind of a foray to the other stuff that we're planning on doing with L2 specifically. With the Ordinals community in our L2 efforts, what we would like to get to is a state where we can actually port individual Ordinals or BRC20 tokens over onto an L2 through Slipstream.
So for the op return stuff, I want to zero in on that because there are a lot of token projects launching right now around op return. And historically in Bitcoin, we've also seen that, right, where op return is used for tokenization. It's difficult to do that though, because like op return has like that, like 80 kilobytes or something like that standardness rule. You guys are opening that up now. And I think a lot of people thought that was a consensus rule, right? Where like you could have.
This is not a consensus rule. You can actually do an entire block as an op return if you like in consensus. I mean, if you want, you can do extremely large op returns, I believe. I would believe that. I'm not entirely certain you can do an entire block, but you can do very, very large op returns. You can also do a great number of op returns. So in a single transaction versus having to have one. And also you don't have to worry about the dust limit. So
okay. Are you guys talking with token projects, or I guess maybe that just seems kind of like from Julian's answer. Yeah. Like anyone who's willing to experiment with Bitcoin, you guys are.
We're agnostic. I mean, so it's not really our we don't care as much about the payload of it. If somebody wants to do a transaction, it's valid Bitcoin. So,
okay.
Yeah, I will say that in terms of the community demand, though, it has been very robust, and that adds to the entire approach here is to open the floodgates to any kind of experimentation. We're agnostic about the kind of it, but we've definitely been receiving a number of inbounds. So yeah, anybody that wants to chat more on it, we can't promise anything, and obviously, there are limits that we must work under. And to further a point that Mike made, we have really sat down and consulted a lot of the community. Portland Hodl being on the team, Bitcoin Core contributor, we've consulted other members of the Bitcoin Core group, and yeah, we want to be careful, right? At the end of the day, we're trying to be iterative about this. We have taken one approach and open to community feedback on how we've taken that approach, and being very cautious about how this could impact the future of Bitcoin. But ultimately, man, there has been so many different projects. We get inbound every single day of different people wanting to try it out in different ways. So yeah, agnostic, but it is active, that's for sure.
One other thing I do want to point out, just to say it, is we do have explicit terms and conditions that you must agree to in order to use the service. So it's it isn't just we will take absolutely anything. It's like you must also agree to the terms and conditions. So yeah.
Gotcha. Do miners or projects need to KYC before they use your guys' block space?
No.
Nice. Okay. That's kind of a cool thing. I've definitely got a lot of comments about that. So in terms of like being agnostic, but also protecting Bitcoin's block space and being a smart steward of it, how do you guys sort of go around that, or like fit those two things together? Are you guys like doing on a case by case basis? Do you guys have terms and conditions? Is there like a rule set you guys operate under? How do you guys think about that?
Like I said, the start of this is very much where we're also learning as we go. We're the first miner to release a product of this kind, and the first time to think about it being programmatic. The front end is still the web app itself is still under development, but it's coming soon. And I think with such a seismic change, we wanted to be extra cautious. So if somebody wants to submit, obviously a non-standard transaction that takes up an entire block, we call these like custom blocks. Definitely something we have to review on a case-to-case basis and weigh it amongst a number of different factors. But I'd say the number one, I guess, priority we've taken to ensuring that we're good stewards of the Bitcoin blockchain, as you said, is again consulting the community. We've had many different people reach out, both with praise and some with criticism, and we're happy to get on calls and address those criticisms. I'll put it this way: this isn't an overnight project. We've spent a lot of many months toiling over thinking through the implications of what we've been doing. But ultimately, we can't just stay in our own heads, and so it's something that I think through community dialogue we'll get to the most efficient end state. But at the moment, it is decently ad hoc.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks for clarifying that. So recently, you guys had the biggest Bitcoin block ever mined. I believe you worked with the Runestone project to make that happen. Tell me a little bit about like the genesis of that idea, how you guys like come about selection for something like this. Would you guys always want to fill up an entire block like that? Or is there other ways you guys are thinking about like how you're filling up block space?
I think ultimately the goal, as I said, is to try to increase the amount of experimentation. And we're most compelled to unleash the floodgates in directions where the community has a lot of demand. And so with this particular project you're referring to, it's no secret that this was blasted all across crypto Twitter, and it's no secret that a lot of people were seeking this to be done. Most importantly, though, remember, every single block that goes through Slipstream, it's not free. We're not just simply, hey, come experiment, do whatever you want. This project approached us and said, hey, well, we're willing to pay a decent amount of Bitcoin, well above market rates. And I mean, that's the core premise of mining. At the end of the day, it's a profit motive sustaining this entire Bitcoin network. And in particular, behind mining, if there are people, we're of the belief that if people are willing to pay transaction fees for something that falls under consensus rules, we're more than happy to mine it. So I think the combination of them being willing to pay well above market rates, and on top of that, there being that community demand, it felt like the natural first project to begin with.
Yeah, I get that. If you go out on mempool.space and you look at those particular blocks and you look at what the expected was and what the actual fee paid was, yeah, you can see there's delta there. So that's what it's about at the end of the day. We're miners and we mine for profit.
One thing I want to like zero in on here is the fact that you guys have the full tech stack, right? So like you guys have the ASICs on the ground, you guys have a large enough percentage of the network to really have like decent luck over a long-term period. And then you guys also have your own pool. So that means like you can do with it whatever you want, as opposed to a lot of these other miners where, they're using Foundry, they're using Luxor, they're using someone else. And so for you guys, there's not really like this concern about like pool payouts or anything like that. You guys aren't on like FPPS or anything like that. So all the value is accretive, I would expect, to the shareholders. From an investor's perspective, how have you guys seen investors like respond to something like this?
I think fundamentally it's been positive. Obviously, we're early. It's there's still much more to see with this product, and we still have the web app to release. But it's exactly what Mike said at the end of the day. As we head into the halvening, the issue of transaction fees being too low is, of course, top of mind for a lot of miners. And if you go into mempool.space and you see these blocks that we've already mined with various projects, we're getting paid well above market rate. And that's ultimately that's the business of Bitcoin mining, right? It's not just about transaction fees right now. It's the block reward too. But as we enter into a world where that block reward becomes smaller and smaller, this is the way to make money. And it again feeds perfectly into our layer 2 narrative. The goal is to increase the revenue channels for mining companies, and that can only be a benefit to the investors of said mining companies.
Over like the last year or so, just to jump in there, how have you guys been thinking about this? Because Ordinals are about a year plus old at this point. What was with the timing? Was it just take a while to build this out, or was it like, we want to do this before the happening? Obviously, Marathon was like plugging in a lot of hash rate last year, so maybe that was a priority.
In general, we've been looking at services like this. Transaction acceleration was the first thing we went down the road of, but I mean, it really makes a lot less sense for us as a miner. We don't have a ginormous share of the total hash rate. There are other pools out there that can find a block much more quickly than us. So we started thinking about, generally speaking, well, what can we do? And it's kind of funny. And again, credit to this because it was mostly Portland Hoddle's initiative. I want to call him out, but the fact of the matter is, what are our strengths? Well, our strengths are we run our own pool. And if we run our own pool, we can actually do something like this. So this is something other public miners can't do, because they don't run their own pools. So being able to have the pool and be able to shape and craft our own blocks and determine what goes inside them directly gives us the ability to do things like that and charge a premium for the service.
Love it. Okay, let's transition over and talk about L2s you guys are working on. So you guys announced that, I believe, a little over a week ago. L2 network, there's a lot of different feedback loops into how this works. It's a merge mine network, so we can get into that. Michael, throw it over to you first. Just, again, describe the engineering for this product. And then maybe later we'll describe how it kind of fits into the inscription game as well.
Yeah, well, what Anduro is at its core is it is a platform for sidechains. What it is it is a combination, a hybrid of existing models. One being a strong federation like Liquid, and it's combined with proof of work merge mining, right? So auxiliary proof of work merge mining. So like Namecoin or Rootstock or any of those. And most importantly, because I believe there hasn't been a true Bitcoin sidechain yet by my personal definition. Because my personal definition is that a true Bitcoin sidechain should have no other token than Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin or derivative specifically of Bitcoin that is pegged one-to-one Bitcoin. And then that token also should be freely tradable. So tradable and swappable any place outside. So you don't have to go through the federation to get in or out. And then the other thing about it is it must be merge mined and it must contribute back to L1 security, which I think is the fundamental biggest problems with. There's a slew of L2s about to hit the market. And if you throw Lightning Network on top of that, the fact of the matter is practically none of them do anything to pay back the miner. So if you get TVL of trillions of dollars running on these things and you condense those down into small, tiny little transactions where you're actually reconciling against the Bitcoin blockchain, well, the miners receive none of this incremental revenue for all of these massive flows going on these L2s. So, that distorts miner incentives, which means it could become more profitable for miners to attack the network rather than to secure it. So people talk a lot about the security budget. The security budget, to me, isn't a number. It's not about doubling and profitability. The security budget is one Satoshi more than the attack budget. That's what the security budget needs to be, right? So, but okay, getting back to Enduro as a platform. So it's vitally important that, by my definition, that, any true sidechain of Bitcoin be merge mine, pay back to L1, and be Bitcoin, right? It's only Bitcoin. Rootstock has RIF. That's what you pay gas fees in Rootstock. So because of that, I think it is disqualified from my definition. And Liquid, of course, they have a strong federation. They do not contribute to mining at all. It's effectively a cartel, right? As they determine the prices. Other defining characteristics of the platform. MEV resistance is a fundamental aspirational feature of it. MEV resistance is very hard, and it's an unsolvable problem in many ways on a decentralized platform. But fortunately, since we do have to live with a federation for the time being, which again, it's another core tenet of the Enduro platform, is to, if possible, move away from a federated environment. So if BitVM becomes a viable peg mechanism, we would much rather use a proof of solution, right? But with regard to MEV resistance, Yeah, it's an unsolvable problem in a truly decentralized environment. But if you do have a federation, there are things you can do to garner an element of MEV resistance. And we've worked a lot of these into the side chains on the Enduro platform, of which, initially we have two that we are currently in alpha. There is a Bitcoin style that we actually dubbed Coordinate. And Coordinate is a play, of course, of ordinals. So you have your ordinal on Bitcoin and you have your co-ordinal on Coordinate. But yes, and ideally you'll be able to use Slipstream to pass through the federation, and they will issue you assets natively on UTXO assets on the Bitcoin based is a fork of Bitcoin Core based coordinate chain. And this is that part of it's all based on Paul Stortz's Bit Assets paper. So yeah, I don't know. It's about a 6 or 7 year old paper. Not that many people are familiar with it, but like most things Paul does is brilliant. So but yeah, minor modifications were made to update it, make it feasible. And then we added a bunch of other nuance to it, allowing for MEV resistance and pre-confirmed transactions, so there's two ways to actually do a transaction on Coordinate. One way is traditional Bitcoin mining, and then another way is through the pre-confirmed transaction mechanism. And I'm not quite sure how much time we have to get into the weeds on that, but okay. So, all right. So for the pre-confirmed transaction mechanism, it actually gets really interesting. So what we've done is flip the script on how the user experience is with regard to fees. So the way it works in Coordinate is for a given block or epoch of the federation. So that part of it, the pre-consensus, is done in lockstep time, much like Ethereum or anything else, right? So it's when they come to consensus over a period of time. Every single node on the network timestamps them when the pre-confirmed transactions arrive. And then they've timestamped them and then forward them on. So every single node on the network has its own order of transactions that went through. So it sees its own order. Now, the nodes that go to the Federation members, they each run their own node, of course, and they see things in a different order than everybody else, right? So that all has to be reconciled, right? So you have the window of time from beginning of epoch to end of epoch. And then in that window, you can only fit so many transactions because you have a set amount of space. So you're going to get, necessarily, if you have enough traffic, there's a floor. But if you have enough traffic, you're going to get more transactions that can get placed. So what you do is you actually settle on the fee. The fee is not known at the time. It's settled in by the most transaction you can cram into that space, paying the fee amount to where you get the ideal yield fee. Yeah, by the way, initially, plan is 20% of the fee for these transactions goes to the Federation members to continue, but 80% of this is a holdover for miners. The miner that encapsulates this pre-confirmed block will receive 80% of the revenue from this. So primarily, this is for miners to garner fees, right? The Federation does make money, but that's kind of incidental just to keep the lights on, keep everything running, right? And it's subject to change. Maybe we could even lower, but yeah. So the pre-confirmed transactions, the way that works actually is, instead, I said we flip the script, right? The way that we do that is you do not enter a fee. You do not select your fee. You never bump a fee. What you enter is a reserve amount that says, I am willing to pay a fee up to this amount, right? So that's all you ever enter. And then that reserves your place in line for this block. And either you make it into this block, say a 1 minute epoch. So either in a minute, you've either made it into this or you have been rejected, at which you can try again with a different amount and see if that works. But everybody who makes it into the block pays the exact same fee rate to get into that block. And it's determined by the lowest fee rate of whoever made it into that block. Everybody else pays what they pay, right? So it's fair for that block. But this is an entirely new and different UX, one that we're not accustomed to. One, because if you're trying to get on a block in a Bitcoin style mining system or even Ethereum, you guess. and then you bump, and then you bump, and then you bump, and you're always worried you don't want to overpay. Here, you can't overpay. you say, okay, I'm willing to pay up to this amount, and it'll go through or fail atomically. So, and when we get back to MEV resistance, of course, MEV resistance is all about ordering, transaction ordering, and doing a fair ordering, a fair job reconciling order, right? Of course, this is a decentralized system. I don't want to say supremely decentralized because federations are not super decentralized, but it's not centralized. So you're going to have different orders, right? So the best that you can do to enable MEV resistance is this. So first and foremost, the legal contractual agreements that any federation member would sign are collective. I'm sorry, I use that term federation because it's ingrained, but we're calling it a collective. Any collective member will legally agree that they will not play any MEV games reordering transactions from what their node actually natively receives on the network. So there is that, which again, that's trusted. So you can't really trust that. So what do you do to actually enforce it and enable it, right? So the answer to this is the federation members each get their own ordered list, and then they limit the set to the ones that they're going to do. They select the fee, limit the set further based on the ones who met the fee threshold. Then they take their order and submit it to their nodes, and those get broadcast. They sign it, and they are broadcast throughout the network. So all of the nodes individually look at all the federation members' order, and they run a very small reconciliation algorithm, that just takes the order and it just basically takes the median. So it takes the median of it, and then it tie breaks, several different ways. It uses a couple different ways to say, okay, there's a couple that saw it earlier, so that moves it up in score. And there's a couple that saw it later, so that moves it down in score. And then everybody collapses down on this one canonical order, right? And that canonical order goes back to the federation. And then by PBFT quorum consensus, it's signed off on. And then that becomes the actual order of the block. So if a node disagrees with the order, then they can't really do anything because the federation at the end of the day is a bully and can say, this is the actual order of the block, live with it. But what they can do is they can publicly tell everybody else, no, I can tell by my node that they changed this order and they deliberately did this, because I can see through my node. And everybody else who runs a node can see that too. So by social consensus, if there is some chicanery going on with the federators, it will become very obvious. And so, like I said, you can't really solve the problem of MEV resistance, but what you can do is you can make it obvious that it's happening and promise not to do it, and then make that a condition for using it. So, that's about the best you're going to get.
In the competitive world of Bitcoin mining, one name stands out: CleanSpark, America's Bitcoin miner. At CleanSpark, efficiency isn't just a goal, it's our standard. Our sophisticated facilities are built and led by expert teams who care about Bitcoin and the communities we work in. Scale? We've mastered it. Our large-scale operations have set us apart in the industry as examples of community-oriented building. Our track record speaks for itself. We navigate the complexities of the new economy with precision and with skill, continuously achieving operational milestones. Curious about how we do it? We invite you to discover the story behind CleanSpark's success at cleanspark.com.
Yeah, the MEV resistance or MEV resistance is really interesting. And for background, for audience members, we've done a decent amount of shows, I think, on both Ethereum MEV and Bitcoin MEV over the length of this podcast. Excuse me. But for those listening, it's all about how is your transaction being ordered within a block? Is it going to be placed within a block? Where is it going to be placed in a block? And then what sort of applications outside of Bitcoin are dependent on the transaction ordering? So if you're using a DEX and you're trying to land a transaction on a DEX for a certain time period or price moment, and your transaction gets moved somewhere in the block where someone else is placed ahead of you, well, then they can extract value from you by either the price moving or maybe the miner comes in and it sort of sneaks around. So it's certainly very important that MEV is taken care of. How are you guys thinking of this as it evolves? Is MEV going to be something that you guys keep pressing this legal button on?
So I'd say the important thing to consider with Enduro, just taking a quick step back, is why all of this matters, right? Like, why are we building this layer 2, and what does this mean for the blockchain, the future of blockchain adoption? So I think MEV is part of that. It is a well-known problem across the Ethereum and the Ethereum layer 2 spaces. And we don't just want to create a layer 2 in Bitcoin that's, agnostic, or let's say like tone deaf to what's going on in other layer 2s. But it's one of a suite of different offerings that that we're attempting with Enduro. So just to clarify, it's a multi-chain stack, right? And in terms of why this Bitcoin native definition matters that Mike is talking about, is there's a real impact on the user experience. And when it comes to things like MEV, like this is one of many different things that we were considering. We want to create a layer 2 where the user experience is top of the line, right? Where somebody is working on Bitcoin, where they're benefiting from that appeal, where they're benefiting from that security of Bitcoin, but where on top of that, they are able to transact in a way that they're not being front run by this, consortium of entities we call the collective. We're recruiting members of the collective, and that is of course something that we're also a part of. But at the end of the day, we do want to create a layer 2 where there is this consensus of, trust, don't verify, or sorry, verify, don't trust, my bad. But the goal with MEV is like, this is one problem that you see a lot, which is you have these like big network actors coming in and basically, worsening the user experience for other members. So I'd say MEV is one part of it. But if you're talking about the longer vision of Enduro, it's much bigger than MEV, and it's even much bigger than a particular sidechain itself. At the end of the day, it's how can we abstract away developer complexities, because that's the number one thing with any layer 2 that is created. And I can go on and list a number of layer 2s, but that's not necessary, right? At the end of the day, every single layer 2, most layer 2s that are created, try to innovate the stack. And I think when the second you innovate the stack, you start getting into big problems where now developers have a learning curve. That's why we have 2 sidechains to begin with, a Bitcoin-like one and an Ethereum virtual machine-like one. Idea there being developer complexities abstracted. Number 2, this MEV resistance. It's an important point. At the end of the day, you can't have a lot of trading use cases without front running being prohibited. And what's number 3? Well, you have also a Bitcoin native asset. It doesn't just matter for the Bitcoin community. It matters for the user. Because if I have to buy a new token on top of already using your new chain, man, why would I do that? Like, you're asking for that. That's a friction. And then the last bit, in terms of the merge mining, why even pay the layer 1 for security? Well, at the end of the day, if this layer 2 ends up becoming some massive thing, it'll be like a chicken without a head, right? It's going to be completely untethered. And we want to create layer 2s that benefit from that security of Bitcoin. But, this is also the important bit where users know that it is tied to Bitcoin. You can't define Bitcoin without proof of work. And so we wanted to create a layer 2 that does that as well. But there are many other features in the roadmap, many of which I'm sure, and we're always open to hearing more, of users, hey, man, I use this layer 2 on Bitcoin or Ethereum, whatever, and I had this problem. That's what Enduro is here to solve.
Awesome. So what sort of like dApps or applications are you guys hoping are built on top of this layer 2? I'm assuming that's one of the biggest ambitions here. Since some layer 2s are like payment networks and that's about it. But it does seem like there could be more here, right?
Yeah, no, there's, like I said, multi-chain. So really, like the goal is every sidechain that we create is multi-purpose from the get-go, right? We're not in the business of creating app chains or like something super specific. No. And so Coordinate, the chain that Mike was talking about, the one that's Bitcoin-like, that's backward compatible with Bitcoin, there's a number of different use cases. I should clarify before I jump into them that every chain we're creating is permissionless. So Marathon, in the same way that we're not trying to be prescriptive about the demand that goes through Slipstream, we're definitely not trying to be prescriptive about the demand that goes through Anduro. We're creating these chains and we have these theories, but at the end of the day, let's see where the community takes it. But in the case of Coordinate, you have a few things that are possible. There's, of course, the fact that inscriptions, any sort of inscription activity, Ordinals, BRC20 on the main chain, will at some point get priced out. And actually, it's not even, I'm not some, what is it? I'm not some fortune teller. This has already been happening. We work with a lot of these Ordinals teams, and they've been telling us for the past 6 months, every time that the fees start spiking, they say things like, oh, I can't mint a collection. I can't do anything. I'm stuck. Right. So the number one thing that we wanted to build Coordinate for is serve as a layer where you can port over these Ordinals, these BRC20s, these runes, whatever you might say is on the main chain currently, and you can use them and even access some additional features on Coordinate itself that I believe could really help stimulate a world in which Ordinals are even adopted by institutions, or maybe they're just adopted by a broader retail base. Coordinate is built to be faster. It's built to be cheaper than Bitcoin. That's obvious because it's a layer 2. But yeah, that's one bit. The second bit, ironically enough, in terms of the layer 2s that exist, or the scaling solutions broadly speaking that exist today, a lot of people talk about the Lightning Network, but one of the biggest issues with the Lightning Network is channel logistics, right? You have to open a channel to pay, and you got to close it in order to settle. Well, hey, guess what? Channel opening and closing, those are transactions, right? And on main chain, that can be easily too expensive. It's probably too expensive right now. But what happens on coordinate? All of a sudden, opening and closing a channel becomes cheaper. Opening and closing a channel becomes faster. And now you have a new layer upon which you could actually use the Lightning Network. So that's coordinate. We'll put that off.
Eventually even get it back to Bitcoin with submarine swaps. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's coordinate. Alice, which is the second chain that we're building, they're both in alpha at the moment. Which comes out first is really anybody's guess, but they're both heading toward an open beta period. Alice is an EVM stack. So that means you have Ethereum smart contracts, but the native asset is still Bitcoin, and the consensus is still a majority dominated by proof of work. So what is Alice built to do, right? Because in terms of the tech stack, it's obviously not differentiated from any of these other EVMs that are coming out. The goal is institutions. I think with Marathon, one of the biggest reasons, one of the biggest things or advantages rather that we have in this layer 2 space is there's no other big layer 2 coming out that's backed by a massive institution with people who, know how to approach, like comparable institutions who are blue chip compatible, to put it a different way. You're also not seeing any other layer 2 that's going to definitively exist in the next 5 years. Some of these other layer 2s that are coming out, they're venture funded. Are they going to be around in the next 2 years? Who knows? Some of the biggest layer 2s in Ethereum, it's still a question mark as to whether they'll exist in the next 3 years. Now, I'm mentioning this, and it goes back to your point about use cases, because at the end of the day, if you're an institutional decision maker and you're thinking of tokenizing a real world asset, starting a loyalty program, engaging your customers through new channels, doing whatever, DPIN, you name the use case, you are going to do that on a chain that's definitively going to exist, on a chain that's reliable. And that's fundamentally what I believe Alice brings to the table. Is most developers out there and most teams are thinking of building Ethereum-like smart contracts. All right, we'll throw you a bone, but let's get them onto the Bitcoin network where things are much more institution grade. That's the goal.
For ordinals and runes and other things that want to port over to one of these layers, what does that look like? Is it going to be like a wrapped asset like we've seen with Ethereum and Bitcoin? Or is it going to be the ability to do like a two-way peg where you actually have the asset moving over completely and it can go back down to the Bitcoin base layer if that's what you want to do with it?
Yeah, it would be a two-way peg managed by the collective, of course, like the rest of the pegged asset, the Bitcoin going in. It would be a special, the ordinals are kept in special wallets where they're segregated. And the asset that's created on the side chain, actually, the goal is to be able to do it on any of the side chains. So you could do it to the EVM as well, where it would effectively act like a wrapped asset in a smart contract, or you could do it on the coordinate UTXO chain, where in that chain you actually issue, it's the entirety of the UTXO model. The only difference is you add another element to that model to say, okay, this output is of this type. So you have a type associated with it, be an NFT or a token. And then there's one other flag that you have is this asset Bitcoin main chain native, right? So you could create assets on the sidechain that are sidechain native, but only the Federation can create Bitcoin, or collective rather, can create Bitcoin native assets. And the only way that can be done is by locking them up on Bitcoin. And, of course, if you burn the asset by giving it back to the collective, then that frees it up on the other side of the chain.
Love it. Okay. I want to go into like a more general philosophical debate about like these different chains we're seeing pop up. So historically, we've seen a few things come out. Stacks has their thing. You mentioned, I think, Rootstock earlier. There's been a lot of these different ideas for like how to make miners be participants in a layer 2 that is, incentivized for miners long term, but also allows you to have more expressivity on a second layer. Nothing's really taken off to date. Right now, we're seeing an explosion of different projects. I'm seeing decks and deals be passed around to mainstream crypto investors for a lot of these projects right now, which means that it's hot. L2 season on Bitcoin is a hot topic. How do you guys think about the underlying security or premise of this chain versus the other ones that you're seeing out there? And then in general, where do you guys look at this and be like, oh, we're at our endpoint here. We like where we're at. I know Mike used it earlier, like BitVM would probably be something you guys would like, fraud proof. That would be more beneficial than anything else. But in general, how do you guys feel about some of like the trade-offs here on the technical side of things? Michael, I'll throw it to you first.
Yeah, personally, I view the federation model, strong federation model, as a necessary evil for the time being. There's lots of other chains that use, ZK proofs. The fact of the matter is that Bitcoin main chain is not set up to handle those. So you can't really do anything that's truly zero knowledge like you can on Ethereum or any other Turing complete with the present state of Bitcoin. That being said, there are a bunch of soft fork proposals, and of course BitVM, which again, though, I don't think it's in a usable state. I don't think it will be in a usable state for quite some time. If that changes, I'd love to incorporate it directly. But as to differentiators between the other L2s, I would say one of the biggest things is we do not have a token. Like, we have no fundraise token that we're putting up. All the tokens that we have are Bitcoin. No native token exists on the chain except for Bitcoin that will be locked up and spawned on the chain. There is no asset issuance schedule. There's no reward subsidy. There's only fees. That is all that exists on any of these chains are fees, right? And you can create whatever tokens you want, but the native token is just fees, just Bitcoin. Furthermore, we don't offer, and we don't purport to offer, any form of yield for anything that we're doing. We're not promising, oh, okay, give us your Bitcoin and we'll give you more Bitcoin. That is not the deal here. You see that a lot going around. Everybody's promising yield. Everybody wants yield on Bitcoin. That's not what this is about. And I think long-term, anything that promises yield in a depreciating asset is ultimately doomed. So, a deflationary asset. Yes.
Yeah, it's a tricky subject there with the yield. I'm seeing a lot of projects come out right now around that. From unless you want to jump in there, Julian, I do want to pivot to talking about like how miners can participate in this. You talked about the federation, and that seems to be like adjacent to it, or maybe you could kind of clear up how like the federation and then like merge mining work together on this, because I'm assuming you're trying to incentivize miners outside of Marathon to participate in merge mining.
Yeah, they are fundamentally related. And I think if you think about a differentiator between what Enduro is and what other layer 2s try to do, is that we're ultimately rewarding main chain with a Bitcoin denominated asset. It's something that if you say to a lot of these other layer 2s, they'll admit that's the case. And yet you dive into the technical docs, you don't even have to go that deep. And immediately you see that the miners are getting rewarded in some altcoin asset, something that isn't pegged to Bitcoin, or, they'll find creative ways to loop around the subject. But at the end of the day, as a miner, if you want to be part of Enduro, you are going to get paid a Bitcoin denominated asset via proof of work, the same type of proof of work that you are already performing. Your machines, you can repurpose them to mine both Bitcoin and Enduro and every single sidechain in Enduro without any extra additional energy consumption, and really just via simple API integration. And that matters because at the end of the day, if you want a network that's properly decentralized, you have to follow the same, or rather reward the same incentives behind decentralization that underlie the Bitcoin network. And so Bitcoin compatibility, we embed that at the core layer of what every single Enduro sidechain is all about. Now, connecting that a little bit to, why do these other Bitcoin layer 2s, the ones that have existed and the ones that do exist, why none have taken off and why most probably will not, I think it comes down to that, because at the end of the day, we kind of just assume that we can red hair a user. Oh, it's Bitcoin. It's a Bitcoin layer 2. Oh, but you have a new token. Oh, there's no mining whatsoever. Oh, and on top of that, like, this network is just totally different in XYZ. Users aren't stupid. It's very easy to get a sense from these projects that, okay, what I'm on right now is truly not Bitcoin. This feels, I hesitate to say a scam because I'm not saying that these other layer 2s are necessarily scams, but if you're a Bitcoiner and you have Bitcoin, all right, like you're going to be extra cautious with that. And you're not just going to take a promise of 5%, 10%, restaking yield as a given. You're probably going to think about it a little bit more. So I think that's a really big reason. But I think another big reason is you're talking about a lot of these layer 2s are just dominated and just totally focused on very narrow communities. As opposed to thinking beyond, thinking from the, entire landscape of the Bitcoin world, but even beyond the Bitcoin world as well, very, very few projects even get to the former. They target a very particular set of Bitcoin users, the ones that are willing to get yield in some altcoin on top of their Bitcoin. right? Very few will extend beyond that. And what we really want to do with Enduro, the multi-chain aspect to it, is how can we extend to a community that goes beyond, and maybe even, normies to some degree, right? Because I think it's only when you begin thinking on that dimension, on the dimension of, all right, let's think beyond what blockchain currently is to what it could be. That's when you start getting some really great following. And it's something that you see in a lot of other layer twos that are created in other networks. They're thinking bigger. This Bitcoin layer two narrative, the fact that it's at vogue. It's definitely in vogue when you're talking about Bitcoin audiences. But outside of Bitcoin, most people don't even know that's going on, right? So I think there's a big responsibility we've put on our plate, which is how can we keep this as Bitcoin native as possible, but on top of that, make this message something that's more global and make it something that's more cross-applicable. That's the challenge that I think no other Bitcoin layer two has solved or is even trying to solve, if we're being honest.
Love it. I mean, the pitch is very strong here. From a mining perspective and a Bitcoiner's perspective, what does it look like to try to onboard people? What's sort of the pitch to people? I think the monetary incentives obviously will speak for themselves over time as projects jump onto it. But certainly there was a lot of pushback or a lot of Twitter chatter on at first when this popped up. You can excuse a lot of that just being, Bitcoiners are skeptical and they don't really trust anything. But going forward, like I would assume for a business perspective, you guys want to convince people to be a part of this and build on top of it. So how are you guys going around that marketing / BD part of this?
Yeah, forming partnerships and forming relationships that most people wouldn't expect out of a Bitcoin layer two. A lot of other Bitcoin layer twos have had to fight tooth and nail for really basic infrastructure like exchange listings or custodian support or like Oracle support. And we're finding that even within the first, 9 days of announcing Anduro, we're getting a lot of the top projects, a lot of top infrastructure players reaching out to us and wanting to engage with us in these conversations and to see, how can we support these assets? You guys are actually giving a differentiated pitch. And I think that's telling, because a lot of these other layer twos would die to have like the best bridges, the best oracles, the best custodians try to support them. And we're already in late stages in all of these on all of these dimensions. I think that kind of shows you that Bitcoin layer two, generally speaking, is in need of a new narrative. But it also shows that given that we have not just centered the pitch over simple yield or some altcoin, we've actually made the yield about utility, right? What more can you do? How can we extend the functionality of Bitcoin? Not just how can we extend the money-making capabilities, although, of course, that's part of it, right? We're building a layer two in blockchain after all, right? This isn't, some non-speculative industry. There's going to be speculation. But how can we, in other words, pitch to these skeptics in a way that they don't immediately throw it out the window? So I think the Bitcoin denominated yield for miners is a really big one. That gets in the mining community. And the fact that we're a big miner, they're signaling there, right? Like if you're a smaller miner and you look to Marathon as an example, and here Marathon is building and merge mining a layer two, chances are you're going to do so as well, right? So that community set. On the community of users, it's totally a function of developers. And I think the fact that we're providing a multi-chain stack with a number of different frameworks and many, many more to come, that means any developer, there's no learning curve, right? You want to approach Bitcoin, you don't have to relearn Bitcoin script. Or if you are an expert in Bitcoin script, you don't have to learn EVM, right? You've got everything that you need there. And then the last bit, of course, would be that infrastructure. And again, the infrastructure, it's oftentimes, if we're being honest, it's a question of money. Some of the biggest institutions are not willing to give their infrastructure out for free, but it's also a question of focus. And it's also a question of status, a question of, reach. And I think that's something that we're already seeing this project in the very early stages. Get to a level that it's unexpected to some degree, because again, the history of Bitcoin layer twos is a pretty unremarkable one. But in other ways, it is expected. You know what I mean? Like we haven't started. You heard Mike explain what Anduro is. That this is a network that has come after many, many months of very deep thought and very deep debates. So it's a well thought network. I think it's a well pitched network, and I think that's resonating with a lot of top institutions. That for better or for worse, you need them. You need a market maker. You need a liquidity provider. You need a lot of this like basic stuff that these other L2s, they can only hope that retail or that a Reddit post gets them on the map, right? We don't have to necessarily scrounge for that sort of demand.
Love it. I mean, yeah, about a year ago, I was talking with Fred at the Bitcoin Ski Summit, which is happening right now. So I think it's almost like a year to that conversation. And we talked about halvening coming up and how Bitcoin miners, especially the large ones, we're going to have to become creative and start thinking about ways of making revenue outside of traditional ways. And I think we've seen that with the energy markets, where a lot of these Bitcoin miners have been, hedging, building out alternative lines of revenue there. And I think on the hosting side, we've seen a lot of that. And now we're seeing it here with, this Bitcoin tech stack. And I like this part though, because it's like, it's built into mining. There's more incentives for everyone to be aligned with it. And then of course, like we need a better scaling solution. I think like this bear market ended a little faster than people expected. And now we have high Bitcoin price. We have a very bloated UTXO set, and we don't have a lot of great scaling solutions. I'll give it to you guys for final thoughts here as we wrap up. Or Mike, any final thoughts to leave our viewership with?
Just on the platform, I would say just reiterate the twin objectives is one, increase and enhance the actual utility and usability of the Bitcoin ecosystem. Allow Bitcoin to do more new and interesting things for more people. That's one of the goals. The other goal is to provide revenue back to Bitcoin miners. At the end of the day, Marathon's in this because we're a miner and we want more incremental fee revenue. So, and again, I will say this is open to all miners via merge mining, and we intend to make that as easy as possible through integrated APIs such that any miner can plug in the AUX POW very easily into their apparatus. I mean, we're still building all that out, but primarily we're only working with our own tool now, but it is open to all. It is not to be closed. It's not something Marathon's doing just for ourselves. The other thing that I will say that Marathon does bring to the table, being a sizable miner, is we can effectively guarantee that we will have some degree of timely, no matter what the market does, peg outs from this back to Bitcoin. Because we do actually create blocks and we can prioritize peg outs from these chains, which is something a lot of L2s can't say, especially if we go into a bull run and you start seeing fees get very, very hectic. If they do not have their own hash rate, they're going to have a real hard time finding it in a block. So, so that pretty much rounds it out for my stuff.
Only thing I'll add is the incentive for us to succeed is, as Mike has mentioned, not a token. The incentive for us to succeed has nothing to do with a venture raise. We didn't venture raise for this. All right, we're a publicly listed company. This effort and where it's going is purely a question of Marathon and its close partners' balance sheets. The incentive to succeed is utility. At the end of the day, if this thing isn't active, if we don't see transaction volume, if we don't see fees being generated, then it's been a failure. And I think that creates what I believe is the incentive for this to succeed in a new way, or for this product to be differentiated. Because we don't have to worry about the token or a network of venture capitalists or like pure speculation, it means that we can actually innovate how blockchain is actually adopted, generally speaking, how Bitcoin in particular ties in to a vast number of technological applications, be they things that the blockchain or the broader community is talking now, or be they things that they're not even expecting. So I think for me, what excites me most about Enduro is that it has genuinely Bitcoin compatible incentives, but it also just has incentives that'll make it, I think, a robust network. And the goal is to really make it robust in a way that sounds and feels different from the slew of L2s that everybody's hearing coming out into the world. And so for the miners out there that we're miners, we get pitched. Last week was pitched by 5 different layer 1s and layer 2s asking, Marathon merge mine our chain. Look, for sure other miners listening have that same exact situation. At the end of the day, say no to most of those things. At the end of the day, like they're pitching you an asset whose value is very indeterminate. The pitch Enduro gives to miners is, we'll pay you in Bitcoin, all right, or Bitcoin denominated asset rather. We're paying you in that. We're paying you.
It is Bitcoin proper. It is not. We want to be very clear about that. But it is Bitcoin denominated, and it is
exactly. And so Bitcoin denominated asset. That's the reward here at the end of the day. It only succeeds if there is actual volume on the chain, and because of that, I think it's going to be the most robust of the layer 2s that exists. And at the end of the day, it's here to stay. Whether we like it or we don't, there's enough money put into this thing that it's going to be the most stable and also the most robust layer 2 out there. That I'm sure of.
Awesome. Julian, Mike, thanks for joining talk about this.
Thanks.
Probably one of the better tech pods we've had in a bit. So appreciate your guys' time.
Of course. Thanks a lot, Will.